This is Digital Marketing Depot, broadcasting live. I'm Karen Burka, your webinar producer. Thank you for joining us today for Amp Up Your Call Conversions, 5 Things You Need to Know. We are very pleased to welcome Eric Anga, the founder and CEO of Stone Temple, Jessica Michaels, Marketing Manager at Call Tracking Metrics, and Matt Mills, Front-End Developer at Call Tracking Metrics. Before I turn the webinar over to our speakers, I want to tell all of you a couple of things. If you need some help or have a question for our speakers, just use the Ask a Question box, and we will do our best to help you. If you want to tell a friend, check out our sponsor, Call Tracking Metrics, or Digital Marketing Depot. There are some widgets at the bottom of your screen. Just click on them, and they will take you where you want to go. Remember, you can customize your audience console to move or resize any windows that you have open. Now, we are going to hear a lot of great content, so I wanted to let you know we are recording this webinar, and we will make it available for viewing on demand this afternoon. I'll send an email when it's ready. All right, with that business taken care of, let me make some more formal introductions. Eric Anga was named both U.S. Search Personality of the Year and Search Marketer of the Year in 2016. Under his leadership, the award-winning Stone Temple Digital Marketing Agency has grown to 70-plus employees with a broad and diverse client base that includes many well-known Fortune 500 clients. Matt Mills has been building websites for more than 17 years with a sharp focus on both innovation and optimization. As a front-end developer at Call Tracking Metrics, he creates enhanced digital customer experiences and implements complex applications across both web and mobile environments. Jessica Michaels is a digital campaign manager with extensive experience in both Google AdWords and Google Analytics. She drives traffic to the Call Tracking Metrics site, paid search, online, and social display channels to maximize awareness and expand the top of the marketing funnel. You can see more complete bios and contact information for our speakers on the left side of your audience console. Remember, if you have questions for our industry experts, please make good use of that Ask a Question box. I'll get to as many of those questions live after the formal presentation. So today, we are going to start off with an audience poll. Here's our question. How would you categorize your current status regarding AMP? Got 4 choices. Please choose one. Are you in the research phase? Maybe you have developed a strategic plan around AMP but haven't implemented it yet. Or maybe you are currently in the process of implementing AMP. Or maybe you are well ahead of that and you have active AMP sites already out and active. So I'm going to just give you a couple of seconds to click on your response. Then we're going to pull up the results, and I'm going to bring in our first presenter, Eric Anga, to look at them with me and see what kind of insight we have into our audience today. So we've got nearly 60% who are still researching AMP, but then we've got another 25% who've got active AMP sites already. So Eric, we've got a diverse audience that I think is going to get a lot of everything that you and Matt and Jessica have to say today.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Karen. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all here today. It's great to see that we have a diverse range of experiences. And we already got a nice introduction to me, so I'm going to skip over that, and I'm going to actually just jump right into the content. And what I'm going to be talking to you about today is actually the data from a study that we released on October 9th, and the short URL you see there on the right is where you can go get more of that data and see the full report, which includes 10 detailed case studies from people that we worked with that implemented AMP. So I'm going to do that in the context of some of the things that you really need to know about AMP, and I'm going to cover 3 parts of that story. But first, I actually want to give you a little bit of a very brief background. Now, AMP has been around for a couple of years, and if you've been someone who's been, following AMP just maybe only in the press, you'll be aware that it was a consortium put together by Google, but it's not a Google-owned program. It's actually an open-source program, and there's many different players that are a part of that consortium. And a lot of the people who were brought in initially were media sites. And in fact, one of the things that Google did is to entice those media sites to actually implement AMP, they created an AMP news carousel that would show up when you do searches on a mobile device right at the top of the results. So for those companies to implement AMP, they could benefit from this huge UI change in the mobile environment that could potentially significantly increase their traffic. Because if you're in this AMP carousel at the top of the results, you are getting much higher visibility than if you're part of the regular search results. And so, outcome of that is a lot of media sites jumped on really early. And I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of a profile of one of them, a company called Thrillist. And they did a custom AMP implementation. And the interesting thing is it took them roughly 4 weeks to do it, at least their initial implementation. They've done some enhancements since then. And they converted 90% of their article pages, all of their article pages, but 90% of their site pages into AMP. And keeping in mind that they had this wonderful news carousel on the mobile devices to take advantage of, they saw amazing results. So their traffic actually, their mobile traffic increased by 70%. Organic mobile traffic went up by 70%. That's a huge lift, of course. I'm actually including data on 2 other media sites that were anonymous participants in our study, one of which was up 67% and the other 30%, both of less than Thrillist, but still pretty outstanding. I mean, step back and think to yourself for a moment, gee, if I had something I could go spend 4 weeks on right now that was going to increase my traffic by, say, 50%, that would be pretty motivating, right? Clearly, the major media sites have had and continue to have a big incentive to participate in AMP. And this has caused some confusion because people think, okay, the media sites are getting this. Should I think of AMP as a ranking factor? Well, unfortunately, that's not the truth of it. If you're not a major media site, you don't have something like the news carousel available to you. And as John Mueller is confirming, Google's John Mueller is confirming in this tweet response here to a question that he was asked, he starts with, AMP isn't a ranking factor. And so, okay, so no SEO benefit for me, I guess, so why should I do this? And so now let me start weaving the story as to why maybe you should still do it anyway. And first, I'm going to start with this piece, which is that here's some data from 3 really major brands, and it's stunning. A 0.1 second increase in page load time caused a 1% decrease in sales for Amazon. And then I love my column over here on the right. That's $1.3 billion a year. That's pretty serious change, right? And Walmart, 1 second decrease in page load time on Walmart.com, 2% increase in conversions. Not quite as lofty a number as the Amazon number, but it's still 274 million a year. And then, the corresponding data for Yahoo showing an impact potentially of 600 million visitors per month. This is pretty serious stuff, right? And so a 1% increase in sales or a 2% increase might not seem like that big a deal, but keep in mind we're talking about really tiny changes in performance here, and you might be able to do quite a bit more. And then here's a poll that was actually taken on 9to5google.com. And the way the question was asked in the poll, users were asked if they looked for the AMP lightning bolt sign in the search results, and would they be more likely to click on them if they saw it? That was the form of the question. And then here are the answers. The first answer, over 51% of the people said yes, they would click on it. And then you see the rest of it. I prefer the stripped down version of websites when reading something. I'll talk about that more later. But that should create an incredible amount of motivation. more than 50% of the people are literally looking for the symbol and clicking on it if they see it. And last I remembered, SEO was not about rankings in search. It was about getting more traffic from organic search. This data right here says that even if it doesn't impact ranking, it will help you get more traffic from organic search. It's enough for me to take notice and be quite interested in. All right, so now I'm going to go into 3 things that I think you should know about AMP, and I'm going to do that first by stating a related myth. So myth number 1, AMP only benefits news sites. Well, I've kind of already teed this one up a bit, but I'm going to give you another one of our case studies from our study. And this is a profile of a real estate site called No Broker. They did a custom implementation where they converted all their Google index pages. It took them about 6 engineering weeks, 2 engineers, 3 weeks. And they did another kind of cool thing. They also implemented a progressive web app for pages after the landing page. So in their architecture, people would come from Google and initially be on an AMP page. And then from there, when they go to other pages on the site, those would be in a progressive web app. And so let's take a look at what kind of results they got. Well, okay, their bounce rate was down significantly. Pages per session and average session duration were up. Okay, that's kind of interesting. But the next 2 metrics are where the money is at for No Broker, by which I mean when they get increased registrations or increased conversion on their site, this is what drives revenue for them. And the conversion up 77%. That's pretty serious stuff. So, okay. This is the first thing you need to know about AMP. It's not only for news sites, all right? So it can work for many, many different sites. All right, since I mentioned progressive web app, I'm just going to briefly talk about how that integrates into an AMP story because it's something that you may also want to be considering. And this is kind of a block level diagram of what a progressive web app looks like. I'm not going to walk through each piece of this, but what I want you to know is that an app, a typical traditional smartphone app, is something that lives on your phone, whereas a progressive web app is a modified form of a website that behaves just like the app on your phone, by which I mean it can actually access hardware on the phone and functions on the phone in a way that's pretty similar to that native smartphone app. And so why that's interesting is there's this thing that I'm showing here on the, called the middle right, called a service worker. And the service worker does something really cool. While you're on a current web page, the service worker is already fetching the pages, prefetching the pages you're most likely to load next. So when you as a user click on that next page, the page may well already be completely preloaded, so it loads instantly. Now, since we're talking about AMP, and AMP is all about increasing speed and performance, what the service worker does for us is it gives us some more ways to increase performance. So, in fact, here's just another view to explain that. Step 1, user requests the web page. Step 2, they get the page, and while that happens, kind of down below there, I show the service worker that started to preload pages, and by the time the user requests a new page all the way over in step 4, the page is already loaded. Bang, it loads. So it's really, really slick. So, okay. So now I want to go into myth number 2, which is that AMP can't be used for e-commerce sites, okay? And this is a very popular myth, and I'm going to bust that myth with my third profile. And this is a major e-commerce site. They're in the fashion industry. They converted all of their pages all of their category pages plus their home page represents the overwhelming majority of their organic traffic. Very similar to No Broker. It took about 2 to 3 weeks to implement, And also, interestingly, they also leveraged the concept of a progressive web app. So let's take a look at the results they got. So landing page load time was reduced by 65%, okay? And bounce rate on the site was reduced by 40%. Now, I'm not able to share the specific revenue figures as to how much their revenue went up. I'm not being allowed to disclose that, but I can tell you that it was a significant increase that they were able to see. And to provide further backup to this theme, I just want to share, I also get to talk to the folks at eBay and the people responsible for the AMP program over there. They've been pushing out AMP for some time. I wasn't able to get a complete profile nor specific increases in performance, but I did get this statement from Pete Dainty, who is a senior director on the technical side of things over there at eBay. And, you know, the results they're getting are strong enough that they're fully committed to it, and they're rolling it out full force. So the net of this is we know of sites that have had very good success with e-commerce. And the second thing you need to know is that AMP works really, really well with e-commerce sites. You just have to take the time to do it the right way. So now let's talk about myth number 3, which is that AMP sites are going to be some shell of your full site, that they're going to be stripped down versions of your regular site. And I'm going to share a case study from a company called Beach House. Turns out that these folks are using the web to generate leads for their business. It's a rehab facility. And as pertains to the next 2 presenters on this call, they actually use the web primarily to generate leads via phone calls. So it's really, really important for them to be able to get those calls and associate it with the fact that it came out of their website and their AMP pages. So they had a WordPress site, and they tried a couple different plugins. They settled on the AMP for WordPress plugin. They converted 61% of their pages. And it, again, took them about 3 to 4 weeks to implement it. So how did their pages perform? Okay, well, wait a minute. These metrics are worse. Their pages per session are down. Their session time is down. And their bounce rate is up. Oh my gosh, maybe they ought to remove it from their site. Well, turns out, did a little homework, and I went to their site on a mobile phone, and you'd have to be familiar with their site, what they're doing, but I can tell you, if you look at this menu and you understand their business, you actually quickly kind of figure out, instead of being their normal main menu, when you click on the hamburger link, it's a semi-alphabetical list of all their menu choices. It makes no sense at all. It's screwed up, basically. And there's no call to action or anything on the page. So what we did is we did some stuff and did a lot of hard work to fix some of these problems. And, you know, fixed the hamburger menu, added a clear call to action, and boom, you see what happened to the session time on their site. It just started to scale very rapidly and very, very nicely. And, you know, when we went and looked at the metrics, we found that they actually improved significantly, but they still weren't quite all the way there. And that's when we realized that they also had an analytics problem. And that's going to cause me to go into my second sidebar, which is a description of what the analytics problem is in AMP if you don't take the right steps to address it. So here's the problem. What happens when you have an AMP implementation is a user does a search on Google, and then they end up getting sent to your web page, but the web page is sitting on google.com, not your domain, because they're getting it from the Content Delivery Network, or CDN, of Google. So you have some analytics that you're allowed to have on those pages, and it's there, But when the user clicks on a link and goes to your main site, I'm showing in step 4, and then step 5, the web page getting sent to the user, they have shifted from google.com, and I'm using the Stone Temple Consulting website as an example, to stonetemple.com. And it's actually very complicated to get those two analytics things to integrate together and talk to each other. So the outcome of this is that your pages per session inevitably show, like for your AMP analytics, show like it's always going to be very close to 1 page per session because they were on google.com. As soon as they clicked on something they left. The bounce rate looks very high because, again, you're getting only about 1 page per session, and the session time is very short. So you have to fix these things or your analytics is going to be wrong. So there's a thing called session stitching, which basically very simply is shown in sort of the yellow-orange color there on the slide, allows the google.com analytics to share a client ID with stonetemple.com. It allows those things to be treated as like 1 session on 1 domain. Not perfect, but it works pretty well, actually. If you actually want to go find a complete description of the session stitching fix, you can go to the short URL on this page, which is slightly different than the one on the other one I showed you a moment ago, SMX AMP. It says that because I'm going to be talking about this at the SMX conference next week. But so that's the session stitching fix. But I want to go a little bit deeper with this and show you just a couple more things about AMP before I wrap up. But actually, before I leave the analytics, because this is going to relate to what the call tracking metrics folks are going to talk about, this analytics picture, getting it right, you really want to include the, when you have phone calls that you're driving as an action that you're calling for, you want to be able to track that really well too, and that's as important as the whole session stitching thing that I've just been talking about. But just a few more points for me. I want to show you the experience we had with the Stone Temple site. Here's the standard mobile page for the Stone Temple site, a smartphone view. And when we used the AMP plugin, it looks like this. And it won't take you very long to realize that the AMP plugin, which is shown over the right, is giving us an AMP page that looks very different. The main menu is gone. For example, the social buttons are gone. And that link up top that says Stone Temple points to a 404 error, stonetemple.com/amp. And, it's just like a mess. And not surprisingly, the metrics on the Stone Temple site with the plugin are, kind of bad. But what we did is we took and handcrafted our own AMP pages. As you'll see on this slide, and you'll see the AMP pages we have here look much more like the mobile responsive page, much more in line. And the metrics from that experiment show, so the gray line is the mobile metrics prior to any AMP. The red line is with the plugin, with the really bad metrics. And then after we did the handcrafted version, you'll see that we've gotten very, very close to being on par with the mobile page. And I honestly believe if we were able to keep tuning it, we would get the rest of the way there and actually start to get better performance. Here's the point is, like, the third thing I really want you to know is you've got to invest in your AMP site and getting the implementation right, like you invest in any website. And I know that sounds like work, and that's the unfortunate downside of that, but it's just something you need to do to get the results you're looking for. And that's the third of my 3 points. Just a quick reminder where to get our study at the Stone T Co SOS AMP. And that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening to me prattle on.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. That was some really great balanced information about why you want to do AMP, what you have to work out, and what some of the cautions are with AMP. So audience, as Eric mentioned, we're going to shift right now into, now that you know about what AMP can and or cannot do for your sites, how does that affect what your call conversions can do, or what you can do with your call conversions, especially when you're looking at the mobile audience. So as we shift gears a little bit, we're going to look at another audience poll question, and we're going to ask you about your call attribution strategy. So here's the question. How important is call attribution to your overall marketing strategy? Again, you've got 3 responses, and we want you to choose one. So first, is it critical to your business? You're already a savvy marketer generating phone calls from your mobile ads and apps. Do you use basic call tracking, but maybe you could be doing more? Or maybe you're not sure, or it's just not that important yet to your business. So while you think about that for a couple of seconds, I want to remind everyone that all of our presenters are here, and we're going to have some time at the end of the webinar to do Q&A. So you're hearing really good detailed information about AMP, and you're going to hear it about call attribution. So get those questions in. Jessica, Matt, and Eric will all be here and able to answer them. Let's take a look at our results, and our next presenter is going to be Matt Mills, who's going to take a look at this with me. So Matt, you've got people who almost half say it is critical to our business, and about a quarter each, the other half of our users use some basic call tracking, and maybe they're not so sure. So we've got some important information to share with these people who find that this is going to be critical to their business, right?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And Eric, thanks for that great overview of AMP and that deep dive there. I think this is a great bridge between just talking about AMP and then getting into the call tracking side of things. So sticking with the 5 things you need to know, I'm gonna touch on number 4, and that is, yes, AMP is a simplified version of your site, but, dramatic pause there, complex features can be added back in. So this is going back to what Eric just really talked about. I'm going to get into a little more depth on it with on the implementation side. That's what I focus on. So in a general sense, yes, complex features can get lost in translation when you're making the transition to AMP, but they can often be added back in. One thing I can firmly say is that in the case of call tracking now, that complex feature definitely can be fully integrated into an AMP setup. So it's not the maybe is not there, it's the yes, we can integrate call tracking in AMP. But before we jump into the discussion about AMP and call tracking specifically, I want to take a look about implementation in an AMP environment in a general sense. So when I'm looking at AMP, I always think of 2 core concepts, and those are innovation and evolution. So I think AMP exemplifies true innovation for sure. I think everyone agrees with that, but it's also still a work in progress. And from a developer standpoint, and I think other standpoints as well, it's important to remember this evolution part and be prepared to change and grow as AMP changes and grows. So overall, yes, a basic AMP implementation can strip out advanced functionality on a site. This is something that Eric just touched on. But, and I think anybody who has researched AMP or, even worked on implementing it, you've come across these terms like stripped down, scaled back, when you're comparing the full version of the site to its associated AMP version. And those 2 terms, stripped down, scaled back, they're definitely true to a certain extent, but with an asterisk, I think. And the asterisk is, in this case, is that the advanced features can be pushed out when you put in the basic version, but they don't always have to be victims of the transition. And this is why I like to say simplified as opposed to stripped down or scaled back. But I think the perfect example of that is when Eric just talked about putting in the automatic AMP WordPress plugin, and that gives you kind of a basic AMP scenario environment, but you really do have to go back in and do that handcrafted, put in those personal touches to make it work the way you want it to work. And this is because with AMP, the focus on site speed and usability always take precedent to literally everything else. And so that's when this advanced functionality can possibly get lost. And what this really means when I keep saying advanced functionality is just, random script tags. JavaScript tags are not going to work in an AMP environment the way that they work in a non-AMP environment. But these advanced components that are lost in the transition can be built back in with a little development work and the right partnerships. The only qualifier is that when you are adding these back in, they must be implemented in an AMP-approved way. And what this means is that they have to be part of the official AMP HTML library. This year, the AMP project introduced the AMP-call-tracking tag, and you can find the official documentation for this tag if you search for AMP-call-tracking, AMP-call-tracking. And here at Call Tracking Metrics, we updated the CTM application to bring in support for this new tag. And so now this new setup allows for the full call tracking capabilities in any AMP environment. So that takes us to the next slide here. Implementing CTM in AMP is really extremely straightforward. There's two steps. The first step is to put two different script tags in the head of your AMP HTML. One of them references what I just talked about, the AMP-call-tracking JavaScript tag. The other one is the AMP-analytics JavaScript. In the case of the analytics one, you may already have this in place if you're already tracking with GA or things like that. So that step may even be 50% of what I just said. You may just need to put literally just one JavaScript reference into your AMP HTML. You can find out the latest versions of all these scripts if you go to ampproject.org. And the second step to get call tracking up and running in an AMP HTML is you just really need to literally cut and paste Control-C, Control-V into your HTML where you want the number to show. So as you can see here, this slide is really basic. It's really straightforward. Control-C, Control-V. And if you have the core components of your AMP integration already in place, including CTM and all the advanced tracking capabilities, it's really super quick, super easy. So that leads us to the next part here with Jessica, and she's going to talk about tracking the customer journey with AMP and call conversions.
Great, thanks, Matt. Okay, in the theme of myth busting, there's a myth that you cannot track calls from AMP pages without installing the AMP call tracking script. Well, this myth is only half true, and in this section, we're going to visit both sides of the scenario. Call tracking metrics will be able to track the call as if it was an offline campaign, the same way we are able to track and attribute a radio ad or a billboard, meaning that you can assign a unique tracking number to the page. However, without installing the tracking script, you won't be able to attribute any session data to the call or send that data into a platform like Google AdWords and have it count as conversion. So why are we talking about phone calls? Well, research reveals that 65% of businesses rank incoming calls as a source of their most qualified leads, with phone contact bringing in between 5 and 10 times the revenue of online contact forms. Yet, almost 70% of marketers say they don't have the ability to track inbound calls through their current CRM system. Calls are clearly important and a viable touch point in the customer's journey, and yet only a small percentage of businesses are accurately accounting for them at all. So let's take a quick look at how calls will report that were generated from AMP pages, both without and with the call tracking script. Here's an example of the call log inside of call tracking metrics. Here you can see we're able to identify specifics about the caller. Towards the center, you can see the tracking source we've attributed to the call. In this case, all 3 calls were generated from AMP landing pages. In the center, you can see we have an empty section that's the data section. Ideally, we'd like to have this section full of robust session data. And then if we expand the view for the session data, we can see that this is empty. Here's how the myth is only half true. And what we're looking at here is the contact view. We're still able to attribute details about the caller, such as their name, email address, street address. And on the bottom in that kind of blued out area, that's our caller insights area. And here we're able to show enhanced information about the caller, like their age, education level, homeownership status, language, household income, presence of children. And in some cases, we're able to link to the caller's Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn profiles. In addition to the caller ID insights, call tracking metrics is able to provide you with call reporting, which will provide visibility into the performance of your AMP landing pages and other marketing campaigns. We also have conversation analytics, like call recordings. We can do speaker segmented transcriptions of the call. We have keyword spotting, which can identify keywords spoken within the conversation and then take various actions after the word has been spoken, like tag the call, or if the customer says something like upset or angry, we can send a copy of the call recording and the transcript to a manager to review the call. AMP pages are primarily focused on mobile devices, so it's safe to assume that phone calls generated from AMP pages are from mobile phones. With our text messaging capabilities, you can create an automatic text response to be sent out after the call is completed. So you can do some pretty cool things like thank them for their time in business, or you can even send a personal follow-up text message. We also have the ability to send your call data into Google Analytics. And when using the AMP call tracking script, we have the ability to send the calls generated from your paid clicks into AdWords as conversions. By integrating AdWords Google Analytics with CTMs, call tracking, call reporting, and other functionality, marketers can truly see the entire length of their sales funnel. All right, well, now let's take a look at the call data from calls that were generated from AMP landing pages that do have the tracking script installed. In this screenshot, the session data column is reporting and providing us with detail on the landing page, the referring site, the search term, and keyword. And this is just at a glance. Now, if we expand our session data view, this time we have a wealth of data reporting. In the left section, we can see the path the caller took on your website, and towards the right is all the paid campaign information, such as the campaign, ad group, keyword, source, and medium. So as you can see, by utilizing the AMP call tracking script, we're able to get a lot more information about not just the caller, but the path that they took to or leading up to the call. The reports inside of call tracking metrics provide insight on how your AMP landing pages are performing. You can segment your reports by landing page, campaign, keyword, ad network, and many other options. Lastly, you can view your calls right in Google Analytics and analyze them in conjunction with your website data. We send all inbound calls into Google Analytics as events with all the website visitor data attached. You can create goals around those events and import those goals into AdWords so that the calls generated from your paid AMP landing pages will be attributed as conversions in Google AdWords. The integration with Google Analytics and AdWords creates a seamless flow of your call data from your AMP pages and all of your paid campaigns, connecting the exact paid click to the caller. Seeing calls as conversions right in your AdWords exposes trends on which keywords, campaigns are driving the most calls and conversions. Being able to accurately track and attribute calls across multiple sources and channels is a complex undertaking, but with the right tools, it's both doable and practical because it ensures you're getting the most for your marketing spend and helps drive conversions. This allows marketers to have a holistic view of all the various touch points that influence a buyer to making a purchase and attribute those values to the various touch points, including AMP pages. Hopefully from these last two touch points, we've demonstrated the value and many advantages of including call tracking and call conversions into your AMP landing page strategy. Karen, I'm going to shoot this back to you. I think we're going to open it up for questions.
Yes, we are. Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you to Matt and Eric. We've gotten a lot of great information today, audience, and as I said, we are able to take some audience questions. We've got a few coming in right now. We've got some good ones coming in, so we're going to go ahead and get started. What we're going to do is, we'll direct your question to one of our speakers, and then we'll let all of the appropriate presenters chime in who can answer the question. So let's start with, this is a nice broad question, and Eric, I'm going to direct this question to you since you did talk about the AMP plugin a little bit. Do you recommend skipping the AMP plugin or using it and tweaking it, or just using the AMP HTML library?
That's a question of your appetite for how much time you're able to invest. And hopefully part of what I was getting across in my presentation is that you're going to need to invest some time. It feels great to think that you can just do a plugin, you flip a few switches, and you're done. But I do think you need to do more than that. Some of the AMP plugins allow you to do a fair amount of customization, though. AMP for WordPress, for example, is one that allows you to do a fair amount of customization. So that may work well for your needs, and I imagine that for some people that will actually be a pretty good solution if you take the time to do the rest of the customization to make sure it's working well and looking, looking really solid and like a part of your site.
Matt, maybe you have anything else to add to that, since it's more of a development issue?
Yeah, for sure. I think when it comes to WordPress, this is always a question similar to a theme. You know, it's your comfort level. Do you start with do you go with a theme that's already completely finished up? Do you start with one and then build on top of that, or start from scratch? As a developer, I tend to start from scratch. I like to do that when I can. But that said, the AMP plugin itself from Automatic does create a very good starting point. But it is key to remember that you are going to always have to put these personal touches on, especially when you're involving things that are more on the advanced side, such as like call tracking or other advanced functionality. So I would say start with the plugin and see what you think. And if it's just not getting it done, then start from scratch. But I think in this case, the AMP plugin is a good place to start.
All right. Let's move on to another question here. Matt, we'll stick with you on this, and then I'm sure Eric is going to want to chime in. Do you recommend creating AMP versions of all pages or limiting it to the top pages? Good question.
Again, I think this is going to vary quite widely. I think the thing you want to remember here is that AMP is basically a landing page type of technology. So people are going to land on that page, hopefully more and more. And then from there, they are probably going to go to more standard non-AMP versions of the pages. So I would say not all pages, be selective, but it really is going to depend on the nature of the website and what they want to do. But think of it, I think the key way to think of it is think of it as a landing page type of technology. So whatever falls into that category, those would be good pages to convert to AMP.
So yeah, no,
Eric,
I do
I'm
think
sure you have some thoughts.
Yes, indeed. So I do think it's a question of appetite, much as Matt started his answer. I mean, for me, I think the benefits of speed accrue to any page on your site, and you can potentially convert every page and get benefits, material benefits from that. But the work starts to scale pretty rapidly as you do that, right? Especially if you have a number of different kinds of page templates you're trying to convert. But that's what was interesting about two of the profiles I shared from NoBroker and Mintra. What both of those companies did is they implemented AMP just for their landing pages. and then progressive web apps for the rest. And the progressive web apps give them a different way to get the speed up rather than relying on AMP. So the general idea of making your pages fast is just a good idea, period. And then it becomes a matter of what's the most cost-effective and efficient way for you to do that.
All right, let's keep moving on here. We're starting to get a few more audience questions. Got people's minds percolating now. Sometimes it helps to sort of hear what other people's questions are. Eric, let's stick with you on this. How do you handle duplicate content with AMP and regular HTML?
So one of the things that you're supposed to do to implement AMP properly, which we didn't cover during the presentation today, is that the regular version of your page is supposed to have a tag called rel equals AMP HTML that points to your AMP version of your page. And then the AMP page is supposed to have a rel canonical back to the regular version of your page. And that's kind of a handshaking level of tags. And the reason why I'm pointing this out is that if you implement that properly, then the pages will not be seen as duplicate content, and you will have no issue at all.
Great. Matt, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say it's a similar scenario to if anybody's familiar with MDOT type of old mobile arrangements. Just make sure you have your canonical tag structure in order. Very similar to that situation. As long as you have the canonical pointing back to the non-AMP version, then you won't have to worry about duplicate content, just like Eric said.
All right, good. Let's keep moving along here. Do you know of any landing page generation companies like an Unbound or Lead Pages, I'm not sure if that's the name of a company, that create AMP landing pages specifically? Eric, I'm going to direct this to you first because I know you work with a lot of different vendors.
It sounds like the question is related to, is there a different way to get the functionality of a plugin outside of WordPress? Am I, at least that's the way I'm interpreting the question.
I think so. I think they're looking for a way to do the AMP pages without having to put all the, maybe they don't have internal resources or something like that.
So in terms of the tools they mentioned, I don't know the answer there, but I do know that there are plugins for Drupal and Joomla. So if you're on one of those platforms, there are tools to help you make the task easier on those platforms. That's about all I can add on that one.
Matt, you have anything to add to that?
It's funny, we were just talking about this yesterday, and we are not aware of any, at least I'm not sure if Jessica is, of any of these landing page companies or the ones that focus on landing pages have AMP up and running. We haven't found any yet.
I've asked around at conferences to the various vendors, and most of them said that they are working on it. And some said that they have it in beta testing, but I couldn't find any of them that had it packaged and ready to go. So I think it's something that's going to be coming from these different vendors, but I couldn't find any at the time that are ready for it.
All right. People are trying to get a jump on what's even out there. Here's a good question just about Google in general, and Eric, I'm going to shoot this back to you to start with. I'm sure everybody will have an opinion on this. Sometimes Google just pushes things out there, but they don't really stick. Is AMP really worth my time and effort?
So that's a great question. So the challenge is with Google, of course, is that they do try things and they experiment and see how they do. I mean, the rel author tags that they experimented with a few years back is one example of that, and many people will consider Google Plus another example of that, and prior attempts at social networks. What makes AMP different is it's a consortium, so it's not an internal Google program. Yes, Google is the primary sponsor, but Other search engines are participating in it, and most notably China's Baidu, Twitter, Pinterest, other people. All of these folks actually have the same ability to benefit from AMP as Google, and so and it's one of the things that makes AMP so interesting is because it's open source. There are many, many people working on it. So Google could, in fact, back away from it if they wanted to, but the reality is it will still remain a way to speed up your pages because it's about a coding discipline and an approach to implementing pages that is meant to be much, much faster. And will still offer benefits. So from my point of view, yeah, it would impact the program negatively if Google backed away from it, but I don't think it would kill it.
Interesting. Matt or Jessica, anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, I'd love to answer this. This is a great question, I think, mainly just because I have a very strong opinion on it. I think it's definitely worth time and effort. And along with what Eric just said, I think another way to look at it is if you think about some of the things, Google does try a lot of things, and we're always trying to guess, what's worth our time and effort. And if you look at some of the things that they turned off or that failed or quotes, I guess, failed, sometimes there are things that maybe weren't that necessary or trying to duplicate things that already exist and make them better. But with AMP, I think the key is that it is really just, it exists to improve user experience.
Yep.
It started with the media sites, and some of those sites were just getting bogged down with rogue ad networks, and the user experience was horrible. And so Google was like, we're going to start this, and we're going to make things better. And with everything moving to mobile, I have a really hard time believing AMP's not going to grow into something more important. So I think it's definitely worth the time.
Yeah, I agree.
Good.
I second.
Let's go ahead, Jessica. And you agree, or anything else to add?
Nope, I agree.
Yeah, good. All right, I want to see if we can squeeze one or two more in here. And Jessica, I'm going to start with you on this one. We are already in the process of implementing AMP on our website, but we hadn't considered call tracking, right? We had about 25% of our audience saying they weren't sure about their call tracking strategy. Is it too late for us to include call tracking into these pages?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is pretty easy. It's no. I mean, I don't think it's ever too late. Is it too late to optimize your pages? Definitely not. And as Matt showed in one of his slides, I mean, it's really as simple as copying and pasting a code into the page. So assuming that you already had some sort of call tracking in place, you could have it implemented in probably under a minute. If you don't already have a call tracking vendor, typically getting up and started with just something easy like one campaign can be done in under 5 minutes. So I would say it's never too late.
Right. I'll just add in, hey, when do you want to start getting the detailed data on what's happening with AMP's ability to generate calls for you and how those converting? And it's definitely as soon as you think of it.
Yeah.
As soon as you think you want it, go get it.
It would take the time it took me to answer that question.
Right.
That's good. And
we're
going to.
Yeah, I'm like a.
Oh, go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say I'm like a broken record here, but I think if you just keep considering AMP like a work in progress, it's something that you're putting in place and you're understanding that you can always make it better and better, then this answer is even easier than even we said. Yes, definitely. It's never too late.
All right, and let's do one last question here for those in our audience who have their call tracking strategy on track and already now wondering about AMP. Matt, we'll start with you. What if I have more than one phone number? Do I have to do anything special to get it to track properly on an AMP page?
Yeah, on the implementation side, no. I'm sorry. You do have to do something different. It's not hard though. It's not difficult. So In a non-AMP page, you just put in our CTM code, our call tracking metrics code once. On an AMP page, you do have to put in, cut and paste some code every time you want the number to show. So on the implementation side, there is one additional step for each phone number, but nothing difficult, So it's super easy to implement still.
All right, good. Jessica, was there anything you needed to add to that, or that should do it?
No, I think that does it.
All right, good. Well, thank you, audience. We got some good questions in there, generated a lot of good thought, and unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. I want to thank Eric, Matt, and Jessica for a very informative and timely presentation. And audience, again, thank you for your great questions. If we didn't get to yours, because I think we had a few more coming in very late there, don't worry about that. All of the questions will be passed along to our friends at Call Tracking Metrics, so everyone will get an answer to the questions we didn't have time for today. I do want to give a special thanks to our sponsor, Call Tracking Metrics, which you can visit, as you see here, at www.calltrackingmetrics.com. That's all for our broadcast today. We look forward to seeing you next time right here at